Hey, welcome to Atomic Geekdom. This is Jenny, and we are here for yet another book club podcast entry. And this week, we are super excited to introduce to the Atomic Geekdom world, Jay Kristoff. I almost messed up your name there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to dive in and talk a little bit about your new series that is coming out with book 2 tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah, so right now
it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and welcome to the States.
Yeah, the jet lag is almost worn off. I've been here for a couple of days now in not so sunny Boston. So yeah, looking forward to getting out and meeting everybody on the road tomorrow. It'll be fun. This is the first time I've toured the States since I think 2019. So yeah, it's been a while since I've been here.
Yeah, there's been some changes since the pandemic. It's an interesting country. So you will be touring. So to bring our listeners up to speed, the follow-up to the Empire of the Vampire books comes out on March 12th. It's called Empire of the Damned, and you're starting your first leg of your US tour.
Yeah, so we just got here. Last place we were was Paris before here, and we did a tour through Ireland and the United Kingdom, Scotland, and before that it was Australia. Australia, the book came out on March 6th, but we managed to wrangle early stock, so we did kind of 4 stops around my home country first to make sure Australian readers got like a world exclusive. So between one thing and another, I've been on the road for about 3 weeks now, I think. And yeah, another week in the States. We've got 7 stops and then I'm done. So it's been pretty hectic, but yeah, amazing. It's cool to be out here meeting readers. I didn't get to. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I didn't get to tour on Vampire because of the pandemic. Like you couldn't get an international flight out of Australia even in September 2021. We were locked down pretty hard down there. So yeah, it's cool to actually get out on the road and say hello to people.
Kind of cool too, because you can almost do it as like a dual one. You can bring back kind of like what we're going to do today is kind of revisit
the sure
series. How's been the reception so far? I saw some of your Instagram posts with, it looks like the UK welcomed you with some mighty big arms.
It was awesome. Yeah, we had lots of great stops there. We got to go to Ireland, which was the first time I'd actually been there, which was really cool. London stop was huge. Edinburgh was huge. So yeah, it was really good. And people, I didn't expect it because book 2s are usually a pretty tricky proposition to write. But a lot of people, like an overwhelming majority of people, are saying that they like book 2 better than book 1, which is really awesome to hear. But I didn't honestly expect it. So yeah, the reception so far has been awesome. It's been great. Really gratifying because I worked on this thing for 2.5 years, and this is the first time I've had a chance to speak to anyone on the road really about either Damned or Vampire. So yeah, it's been really good vibes.
I love it. So I wasn't familiar with your writing until they reached out to us and they're like, check out these books.
Cool.
I dove into Empire of the Vampire, and it was kind of awesome to go in without knowing anything about it. And reading it, seeing the fandom that had started just in following Gabriel's character throughout that story has been interesting because it usually, from my perspective of when I get into different fandoms, there's kind of a group that leans towards a certain fantasy or leans towards a certain sci-fi, and the reviewers out there for it have been all over the spectrum. They've been male, female, older, younger. It's a very broad audience, which I thought was pretty awesome. But in talking about Empire of the Vampire, that book, I could see why, my personal opinion on why people are so excited for the second, because you left that book with a lot of heartache and a lot of like, what the hell just happened? Especially when you get into like the Chloe storyline, and it was kind of a shock when I
So you've read them both. Which one did you like? Which one did you prefer more?
I I don't know if I have a favorite.
Okay,
Um, because I like them for different reasons. The
right.
first one I love because it's a lot of learning who Gabriel is and how Gabe's kind of learning about what and how he is
Sure.
and the different people coming into his life. So I love the characters in the first one. Astrid, hands down, was like one of my favorite characters of the book.
Yeah, me
And
too.
and she's awesome. And then when you get in, there's some traumatic stuff that happens, and then you get into the second book. It's still very character driven, but I don't feel like it is such a vast cast of characters because you're
Sure.
basically based on Gabe and Dior as they're going through this trying to figure out what they need to figure out.
Yeah.
Um, the stories and the world building in the second book are way more favorite than mine than the world building and the storytelling of the first book. But I love the characters in the first book.
Yeah,
So
it's really interesting. That's cool. Yeah, like I say, second books are kind of hard to pull off because you don't get the big climax, you don't get the ultimate resolution of the story, but they need to stand on their own 2 feet. They can't be a prelude for book three. They need to be a tale unto themselves. So it can be a really tricky balance to strike. And when I started writing book two, it actually took me around 3 or 4 attempts to find the right beginning. Once I had the beginning in place, the rest of the book kind of fell into place afterwards pretty seamlessly. But getting the right introduction and striking the right kind of tone in the first third of the book, yeah, it took a little bit of work. So yeah, like I say, it's really gratifying to see how many people are enjoying it. Like I thought it was a good book. I didn't think it would be people's faves. So yeah, it's actually been really cool to watch. Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking to folks on the road about it too. I kind of because some people in the audience haven't read it yet. Some super fans will get it early and read it before they come to meet me. But in the Q&As, I can't really ask anything too spoilery. But I get to chat to people in the signing line afterwards and hearing people's reactions on what they liked. Yeah, it's been eye opening. It's cool.
that's awesome. You have a very interesting writing style in these books that I haven't seen too often. It reminded me a lot of kind of script writing for the fact that a lot of it is the interview that he's having and
Sure.
telling the story, which has been done many times before, but it almost feels cinematographic when you're in the middle of the story. There's dialogue happening between Gabe and somebody else in the story he's telling. And then out of nowhere, the interviewer pops up and is like, wait a minute, and kind of
Yeah.
interrupts his story a bit. So there's a bounce to it that can like abruptly pull you out of the story Gabe's telling that works pretty well for the fact that there's those questions that it sets a different tone when the wait a minute, this is all wine based, right? Or this is the liquor talking. Those type
Yeah.
of things, it brings kind of a humility back to Gabe's character.
Yeah,
Um,
that was the intent. Like the idea that Gabe is telling this entire story with the benefit of hindsight, particularly when he was telling, in book one, when he was talking about the things he did when he was, 15, 16. I think all of us can kind of look back with the benefit of hindsight at the stupid things we did when we were younger. And he can kind of poke fun at himself and the things that he did. So yeah, that the kind of God's eye view that he has of the past allows him to maybe laugh at himself a little more than he might have at the time. And Jean-Francois, the interviewer, is also kind of a device to use there. The fact that they can acknowledge that, maybe he was a little full of himself back then. Maybe he did have a little bit too much swagger in his step. Maybe he did do stupid things for the wrong reasons. Yeah, it adds a level of fun to the recounting that you maybe couldn't capture if you were just telling the story straight. Everyone, like I say, everyone can look back on the silly things they did when they were in high school or in college, and hopefully laugh with the benefit of hindsight. So yeah, I'm trying to do the same thing with Vampire. I wanted it to feel like a conversation that you could overhear at a pub. Like if there's two guys talking on the table next to you and you're just kind of sitting in the background and listening to the chat. I wanted it to have a kind of organic flow to it. And Jean-Francois, the historian, like you say, he sometimes interjects with questions or challenges or I wanted it to feel like two people talking, not just one person info dumping a story onto another who's just sitting there obediently writing it down. I wanted it to feel like an interactive experience. And Jean-Francois, in many ways, is kind of playing the role of a reader surrogate, because if he has a question to ask, then likely the reader probably doesn't understand what's being explained either. So yeah, it's a really fun format to write in, but also in book 2 I get to expand a little more on that relationship between Gabe and Jean-Francois. In book 1, Jean-Francois was a little more of a cipher, but in book 2 he's more of a character. You're getting a sense that the meta structure in which the novel is built, this fact that Gabe is imprisoned by his enemies and telling the story to them, you're hopefully getting a sense that there's something grander at work, and it's building up to something bigger in book 3. So yeah, it's a lot of fun in the format to play with it. Yeah, it's probably the most fun and the most trauma I've ever had writing a book.
Well, you kind of described what I didn't really articulate accurately about book 1 to book 2. Is in the first book, Gabe's stories are kind of a dipshit teenager doing these things, and I'm learning as I go. What's interesting with the conversations in the second book is he's had a lot of hurt, he's had a lot of loss and all that he's romanticizing as he's telling the story. And I like that he gets called out on that sometimes. Like,
Sure.
Like, is that really what happened? Or you just sort of blowing smoke up my ass because you want it to sound good, It's
but also he's drinking wine the entire time, so he's getting progressively more shit-faced as the novel goes on. So by the end of it, he's actually quite drunk. So one of my favorite scenes, I think in book 2, he starts like clapping his hands and making booming noises when gunshots are going off. And Jean-Francois kind of calls him out. So I know what a gunshot sounds like. There's no need to carry on like I think it was like a troubadour in a brothel pantomime or something. But yeah, Gabe is slowly getting drunk. So I had a lot of fun with that as well. The grandiosity of the tale kind of builds both in the sense that you're building towards the climax of the book, because a book has to end on a high note, but also Gabe is getting sloppier and sloppier as the book goes on. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It definitely gives some like layers to the character. Like, he's supposed to be the Silversaint, and he's supposed to be the hero. And he repeatedly tells throughout both books that, like, who said it was the hero type mentality.
Sure.
And you start seeing the layers, the kind of the cracks in the veneer, that he can't solve all the problems, even though he wants to. And
yeah, that is what makes him fun to write. He's a fallen paragon. He's a guy whose glory days are behind him. He was once a hero of the realm. He once was this kind of great white hope in the war against the dead, but he suffered a terrible fall from grace and also a lot of personal tragedy. And in book 2, he's kind of wrangling in part with the fallout of some of the things he did when he was a kid. He's revisiting one of the countries that he ostensibly saved when he was this young paragon of the Silver Order, and it's all gone to hell since he left. So he's kind of forced to grapple with the idea that, first of all, what was it all for? But secondly, did the things I do when I was younger actually make this way worse than it would have been if I hadn't been here at all? So yeah, grappling with the demons and the consequences of his actions in the past is kind of one of the things in book 2, examining the notion of what it actually is to be a hero. One of my favorite scenes, he has a discussion with another member of the Silver Order that kind of got brought up on stories of him as a kid when he was, a young recruit in the order, and they used to get told stories at bedtimes about the thing that Gabe did when he was younger. And Gabe has to confront this kid with the truth that the reason they told you those stories wasn't because I did anything great. They just wanted to G you up before you threw your life away in service to this ideal. The Empress didn't knight me with her own sword because she thought I was worthy of it. She did it so it'd give a reason for all those young men to pick a sword up. So yeah, it's cool watching the character grapple with the notion of the things that he thought he was and the heroic things he thought he did, and the way that's actually playing out against the backdrop of the calamity that's hit this world. So yeah, it's a cool examination of the notion of heroism.
On the vampire sense too, when you started out with the first book, so Empire of the Vampire, how did you decide your rules of the vampire? So most vampire stories through history, going all the way back, right, they always have like the different rules, like can they go in the sun, do they need blood, do they live forever? And you've got basically, I'm gonna say 4 to 5 clans of vampires in this series, and the Silver Saints. How, when you were setting out and setting up your story, because this is a continuation story from book 1 to book 2, and it appears going to book 3 and hopefully more. How did you determine that when you're building your world of what makes these vampires? Do they have souls? Do they not have souls? Can they love? Will they die in the sunlight? Those sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of drew pretty heavily on old Eastern European mythology in terms of the bands. That they can't cross running water. They can't come in unless you invite them. They're repelled by holy symbols. They can't enter holy ground. They burn in the sun. A lot of those original ideas from that old school Eastern European folklore were tied in with notions of purity, the idea that vampires were unclean, they were accursed by God. And so, the idea of, silver was considered, it's a noble metal, it doesn't rust. There was something magical to medieval peasants about silver, the way that steel wasn't. So it was thought to be imbued with the power of God, which is why it hurt vampires, but also they didn't cast reflections, because back in the day, mirrors were made out of polished silver, they weren't glass. And so, yeah, the metal wouldn't interact with them in the way that it interacted with normal people. But yeah, I wanted to evoke a sense of that. The primary goal was to invoke the idea that these things are inherently evil, that they are accursed by heaven, that there is something inescapably bad about them, and that kind of ties into the greater mythos, the mythology that I've built, that you find out a little bit more in book 2. But yeah, everything about them, I wanted to evoke a sense of that wrongness. So the idea that they can't go out in the sun, they can't cross running water because they're impure. Every weakness I gave them was intended to evoke that sense of, inescapable evil about them. But in book 2, you get to meet a few of the younger ones. There's one character in particular who's kind of young enough to remember what it was to be human, and they're grappling with this transformation into a thing that they don't want to be. But the idea, one of the fundamental ideas that I have about them is that, on a long enough timeline, everything erodes, everything goes away, including your morality. And if you're killing someone every night in order to maintain your own existence, pretty soon you're going to stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as food. And that's a pretty gateway into a life of pretty irredeemable evil. So yeah, all of those weaknesses that I gave them were intended to evoke that sense. In terms of the gifts that they've got, I wanted each of the houses to have a kind of distinct feel. All vampires are strong and fast and impervious to normal weaponry, but I wanted them each to have, a particular gift, and that kind of shapes the way that they interact with and move in the world. So the Voss that we spend a lot of time with in book 1, they're more impervious than the average vampire to harm. Swords break on their skin and things like that. So they're kind of this implacable, patient, eternal force that kind of moves slowly through the country, whereas the Dyvok, who you meet in book 2, they're supremely strong. All vampires are strong. The Dyvok are stronger than others, so they tend to solve their problems up front, they tend to, hit things until they break. And so this country Osway that they've been dealing with over in the west of the country has literally broken under them. They've hit it so hard, it's shattered into pieces. So those primary gifts that each of the houses have kind of inform the way they see the world as well. And I wanted each of them to have a different flavor. So
what's kind of cool about that is because of the different ways they approach like battle and such, as Gabriel and in this book with Dior, as they're moving throughout and they're trying to figure out where they need to go, where they need to be to get the answers, they see as they encounter them, the battle changes depending on which ones. Like, is it going to be huge forces that one hit you're flying half across the city, or is it going to be in the mind? Like, and
sure, yeah.
There's a great scene in the second book where they find this is a little spoilerish, but it doesn't give too much, but you start realizing that they can be instruments without being there, and it changes the war dramatically in certain scenes, just on how, if you know your enemy and you're going against it and I can beat them with the sword and such, but then you have to think about the psychological and then the strength and then the location. It makes a different villain, which was very interesting, I thought, in this one.
Yeah, they're fun to play with. I'm writing book 3 at the moment, about halfway through. I was actually working on a big battle sequence before I jumped onto this call with you. And yeah, figuring out the logistics of it all, how the different houses would approach warfare, and it's a lot of fun. I'm like an old tabletop wargamer from way back, so actually sitting down and figuring out the logistics of it all, it's like my nerdy heart is very full right now. I didn't think I'd ever get to do this for a living, so it's pretty cool.
Awesome. That actually brings us back. I totally missed like my main like question, and I can't remember if we talked about it before we logged on or after, but have I asked you what your geek cred is?
My geek cred, I mean, like, I am super nerdy. I am the nerd who is to nerds what nerds are to normal people. One of my biggest weaknesses is board games, so I'll say my geek cred is that I will crush any and all comers in Twilight Imperium 4th edition. that's my favorite board game of all time, but it takes about 12 hours to play. Like, you need a firmly committed group of extremely nerdy friends who are willing to sit down for an entire day and just play one game. So yeah, but we managed to get a group together every couple of months. So yeah, I will take all your bases in Twilight Imperium 4.
I love it. Those are always the best too, is when you just find something. And geeks and nerds, when they get together, 12 hours will go by fast.
Oh yeah. We take it very seriously, but we have a lot of fun while we're doing it too. But you're fighting for the stake of the galaxy, so you have to take it relatively seriously, particularly if you're going to spend 12 hours doing it. Yeah, that's serious business.
Well, that poses an interesting question too, is that these stories are very rooted in fantasy, but they do kind of teeter a little bit into horror in some elements. Do you personally have a genre that you prefer to read versus writing? Like, do you stick with fantasy or?
I do a little bit of both. Mostly fantasy, but a little bit of horror. And like you said, there are some books that kind of skirt the line between them both. I mean, fantasy was kind of my first love, and I'll always go back to it. But I love a good horror novel. I love a good horror movie too. But when I'm writing, I tend nowadays to read non-fiction. When I'm drafting, when I'm editing, I'll read fiction, but I don't want other people's words to kind of bleed into mine, other people's ideas. So I tend to stick to non-fiction while I'm in drafting mode.
I like that. What's cool too about these books is the illustrations that will pop up in certain chapters. And also I've got to give you credit on the special release sleeves that were given out in, I believe, Ireland and such.
Oh yeah, that was the UK, the UK tour jacket. Yeah, that was a great idea. My
Yeah,
UK publishers had that.
anybody
Yeah,
following
I
them
mean,
on Instagram, those are beautiful. They're
they
so
are. Yeah, like almost pure black. It's very, very metal. Like, I'm a metalhead from way back in the day. So the idea, you know, the logistics of giving out a tour T-shirt on a book tour, it's pretty hard to juggle sizes. But yeah, the idea of a tour jacket was a really cool one. Then yeah, they look beautiful in the books. So I managed to snag a whole bunch of leftovers from the UK, and I'll probably give them away and giveaways and whatever in days to come. Because yeah, it's a shame that we couldn't do it for everyone on tour, but yeah, they look beautiful. So I'll give away a bunch as soon as I can.
Yeah, what's great too about this series is it lends itself to the art. It lends itself for every illustration when you get to those pages in the book. The cover art's beautiful. There's a lot of things that tie in like visually that work. The way you write some scenes also feel like those moments in really great fantasy movies where you kind of pop out and you're in a dream. There's one in particular in the new book where Gabe is telling a story about a previous Silver Saint that lost his faith, basically. And
Oh, sure.
the way that that's described, you can envision just bones and the black character in the middle, and just the contrast of what's supposed to be good amongst a sea of bad, and how do you recover for something like that. That paragraph of explaining that history or that folklore or tale was one of my favorite parts of this book. Like I bookmarked it and I'm like, this is
Oh
beautiful.
wow, that's cool. That's cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, I tend to. It's interesting that you say that. I trained as a graphic designer. Like I was an artist when I was younger, and I originally went into graphic design and art direction. That's what I did for a day job for a lot of time. So when I'm writing, it's almost like I'm seeing the movie in my head, and I transcribe the film that's playing on the back of my eyes onto the page. When I'm writing action sequences in particular, that's as close as I get to flow state, where there's very little space between thought and word on the page. And yeah, sometimes I'll just have a cool visual that's in my head that I have to get down. Usually when I'm working on a new novel, the things that will set the whole process rolling will be kind of key visual moments that pop into my head. The first one that I had when I was writing Vampire it's the opening scene. I could see a guy standing in a window in a tower and watching the sun go down over some mountains. And I also had an image of a guy in a tomb fighting vampires, and he was glowing. I didn't know why at the time, but they were kind of the two visual thoughts that kicked off the whole novel for me. But yeah, it's interesting. I could see that priest dressed all in black kneeling in that pit of white bones, really cinematically. So it's interesting that it kind of stuck out in your head too. That's cool.
There's a lot of, and there's, like you said, though, there's a lot that does feel very cinematographic to it, where the interview going back and forth of being, we're in the story, and then just like a scene cut and you're back in the interview room, or
Sure.
that scene where it feels so exaggerated in a good way that that scene feels huge. It feels like, in some movies when you see a huge battlefield, but you can't see the details because it's just so vast and so
Right.
scene of just horror. It's like, but yeah, it definitely feels very, very easily adapted to a script for visual.
Fingers crossed. One day,
Yeah.
fingers crossed. But yeah, I think Bonnie Bon, our illustrator, also did an amazing job in that sense. She started out in the fan art community. Interestingly enough, she did me an illustration, I think it was back in 2018, of my previous series. It was called Nevernight. She did an illustration for me of the heroine, and it was just beautiful. But her style was unlike anything that I had seen. Like you could see Bond's work and know it was Bond. She did work kind of like nobody else. But there was also a vaguely her work, there's an Art Deco feel to it, but also it feels a little like illustrations in an old medieval illuminated manuscript. And there's almost a stained glass window sense to it as well. So that tied in really well with the idea of, a medieval artiste kind of sketching as Gabe told the story. So yeah, she's done an amazing job. I love the work that she did in book one, but I think the book two stuff she did, yeah, she knocked that out of the park. So incredibly grateful. She's super talented.
And kudos on the Instagram where you were doing the little sneak peek squares and building the
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fun.
That was really fun. The best is like the comments on the one where it's just as ass with the heart.
Just a butt.
Yeah, they're like, what are we building here?
Yeah, I had to actually change that Instagram flag for the naked butt, so I had to repost it with a heart over the top of it. I don't know. Instagram's strange sometimes. Things it lets you get away with and doesn't. But yeah, you get to see the uncensored version in the book, I guess.
Well, it's a good example too, though, of her art, for the fact of how detailed she can get with his tattoos, and the tattoos are such a important part in the first book, just for the connection with Astrid and his growth into a Silver Saint. But yeah, I look at the art, and every time like you get to a page and there's an illustration on the next page, it pulls you, and it's like, that's what I was looking at. That's what I was seeing, like when you're reading.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's a great partnership, because definitely.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the books that I read as a kid, I remember, maybe I'm misremembering, but I seem to remember it was a lot more common for fantasy novels to have an illustrative component to them. Like, I remember the first copy of The Hobbit that I ever read had illustrations from Tolkien himself in the pages. I mean, they're not great illustrations, but he's a far better writer than an artist. But there was still a sense of, those drawings took you into the world in a way that the words by themselves simply couldn't. So yeah, I wanted to try and do the same thing here.
One of my other favorite things is, in your bio, it basically ends with, you're not a fan of happy endings. And after reading the first book, I'm like, there might be some truth to it. And then this book, I don't want any spoilers to be leaked out, but I am going to say it gives you that, like, your stomach kind of drops a little bit. And you're like, what's happening? So progressing with the story, do we have more of those like cliffhanging stomach drops to your toes because you want to know what happens to these characters, or you don't want to believe what happens to some of these characters?
I mean, the thing is, I don't know how book 3 is going to end yet. I'm writing it at the moment. I know which players are going to be on the stage when the final act happens, but I don't know how it's going to play out. I've plotted the book up to a point, and then I'm just leaving it to surprise me. I figure if the book is surprising me in the turns that it's taking, then it's probably going to surprise the reader as well. But I don't like the idea that everything is predetermined. Like, these characters are constantly doing things that surprise me. They don't act the way I had maybe planned for them to act, and that ends up taking, it's frustrating because I sometimes have to throw out huge chunks of plot because the characters aren't where or what I thought they would be. But it also means they've kind of become real in my head when they start, putting their hand up and saying, actually, I would never do that. This thing you want me to do that will put me in this place that's convenient for your plot, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't say that, whatever. So yeah, I've left the end of book 3 kind of purposefully open-ended in that sense. And I have no idea what's going to happen. One of the maxims that I write by is the idea that victory without sacrifice is meaningless. If you don't pay something to win, then I don't really see a lot of point. And to illustrate this, I talk about Star Wars. The first Star Wars film, Luke kind of just closes his eyes and pulls the trigger and blows up the Death Star, and everyone goes home and gets a medal. It doesn't really cost anything. So it rings kind of false to me. But at the end of Empire, spoilers incoming, but he gets his hand cut off. He finds out that his dad is the most evil man in the galaxy. His friend gets kidnapped, and the rebels lose. Like, the end of Empire is a defeat. makes the victory that they achieve in Jedi far more meaningful. And that's kind of the maxim that I write by as well. If you don't pay something to win, then it's ultimately meaningless. But I have no idea what they're going to pay.
Yeah, there's truth to that, especially in the Star Wars comparison. Is when you get to Empire, you don't want to see the bad guys win, and at the end you're like,
But
wait,
it's awesome. But it's
yeah,
amazing. The end of Empire is the high point of that trilogy for me.
oh good.
And yeah, it's great. You never forget that moment. I saw a great. It was a video on Instagram the other day. It was like a dad. He was probably my age, and he was playing his kids Empire for the first time. They were watching the movie, and he just had his camera, and he was just looking at the kids, not the screen. And you could see the moment, the "I am your father" moment. These kids just lost their mind. It was so fun to watch, and it made me remember what it was like when I first saw that, 30 years ago or whatever it was. Yeah, those dark moments before the dawn are where the great moments in storytelling are for me. So yeah, that's what I mean by I don't believe in happy endings. I
Yeah,
mean, the heroes are going to win. That's a pact that all storytellers and audiences have. Ultimately, the good guys are going to win. That evil will be vanquished. No one is going to read a book where the villain is standing atop a pile of charred hero corpses at the end of book 3. No one wants that. But yeah, so the audience acknowledges the good guys are going to win. The juice, the thing that drives them, that makes them excited, is the idea that, oh my god, what is going to happen to these characters that I love before the end. So yeah, that's where the fun is for me.
I am worried that you're gonna pull a Rogue One.
Maybe. No one is safe. It's book 3. Like, no one is safe in book 3. I mean, Gabe has to live up to a point because he's telling the story, but after that, who knows? Time will tell.
I honestly thought like I'd get to the end of this and there'd be like a big battle of him getting himself free. And as it was getting closer to the end, I'm like, come on, you're gonna free yourself. But
yeah, there's no way that he's going to do it in time.
yeah, I am like, I've only got like 20 pages left. When is this happening?
Yeah.
It's those type of things are so fun though, is when you can put your energy behind a character. First book, I was all about Astrid. This book, I love Phoebe.
I like Phoebe too. Yeah, she was a lot of fun to write.
She's not only absolutely badass, somewhat terrifying, but she's comical in certain scenes and has like the I can't talk today. The childlike behavior that she does in some of the scenes and her devotion to Dior. She was
Yeah, I mean,
she's she stills the scene every time she's in it.
yeah, she was a lot of fun to write. I mean, it's hard to talk about her because spoilers, but the thing that she is informs her behavior. Yeah, I mean, she's not human entirely, and the mannerisms that informs her character are also not human. So I wanted to give her the vibe of. It's hard to say what she is. It's tricky to talk about without spoiling. But also she's a character like Gabe. She's got a lot of miles under her feet and a lot of scars on her skin. She's lived a pretty rough life as well. So she's a cool kind of juxtaposition for Gabe. Gabe can kind of get lost in his own head sometimes. He's not a character that he doesn't get lost in his sorrow. He's not a woe is me kind of guy, but he focuses a lot on himself and the things that have happened to him. And he sometimes doesn't, lift his head up and look at the people around him. So being thrown into a mess with Phoebe, who also has been through a lot of trauma in her life, it gives him a much needed wake up call, a bit of a slap to the face. And yeah, their relationship was a lot of fun to write. I really liked. Yeah, whenever Phoebe was on the page, she's always doing something interesting. So yeah, it was fun.
Do you treat your characters kind of like you've got your favorites, like your kids, like this is my favorite child I've written, or do all of them kind of have an equal in your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scene. It depends on the day. If they're doing what they're told and behaving well, then I like them. And if they're misbehaving and doing things I'm not expecting, then I'll like them less. Uh, I mean, Gabe and Dior are the heart and soul of the series. Their relationship is the foundation upon which everything else is built. So when they're on the page together, I'm always having fun. There's a couple of scenes in Damned where they're just talking, they're just shooting the breeze, and yeah, I can feel that there's a magic there between them that I really enjoy writing. But yeah, I like different characters for different reasons, and everyone there is kind of doing a job. I love the relationship between Aaron and Gabe. I love the relationship between Lockie and Gabe. I love Phoebe and Gabe. Yeah, so there's a lot of characters that are really fun to write in this one. And yeah, like I say, I'm writing book 3 now, and the foundation upon which the foundation I've built in book 2 has taken me some really interesting places in book 3. So yeah, they're a really cool bunch of characters to be playing around.
Very excited for the first few chapters of the next book.
Yeah, maybe. You'll see. You'll see. I'm about halfway done, like I say. So after a US tour is done, I'm actually meeting up with a buddy of mine, another Melbourne writer, who is over in Spain on tour at the moment for a book tour. And she and I are just going to lock ourselves in a room somewhere out in rural Spain, somewhere with no internet, and just kind of smash words from them. So hopefully at the end of that month, I'll have kind of broken the back of book 2. I want to have that handed in by the end of the year. So fingers crossed, there'll be less of a gap between book 2 and 3 than there was in book 1 and 2. So we'll see. Keep your fingers crossed anyway.
Definitely, there'll be some anticipation of waiting for that release date. So before we sign off, book tour wise, so you're currently in Boston. What's
Boston,
next
yep.
on your US tour?
So we have Plainville tomorrow, which is the Tuesday. We have New York on Wednesday, Chicago on Thursday, Dallas on Friday, San Diego on Saturday. Then I think we have Sunday off, and then Portland Monday and Seattle Tuesday. Or maybe I'm misquoting there, but yeah, the schedule's up on my websites and on my Instagram and stuff like that. But yeah, Plainville, New York, Chicago, Dallas, San Diego, Portland, and Seattle.
And that's all in like the next 2 weeks, right?
It's in the next like 8 days. Yeah, I get 1 day off, so it's pretty full on. But yeah, like I said, it's cool to meet readers. Like usually my day, I'm sitting in my study talking to people that live only in my head. So it's nice to actually be out on the road and talking to readers every once in a while. They're a really fun group of people. So
well, we appreciate
cool
that you took the time to chat with us today, for sure.
No problem at all. This is a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad you like the book.
Yes, and we can't wait to have you back when the next one comes out.
Yeah, I would love that.
All right, and then where can people find you on the great interweb?
Instagram, Twitter, my handle is Mr. Kristoff, MisterKristoff.
I'll put these in the show notes.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm usually more active on Instagram. I'm not a huge fan of Twitter, but you'll see me around.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not.
Well, I'll see too if I can get the train ride down to San Diego, and we'll try.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah, you should. And I don't know if it's sold out or not, but if it does, just drop me a mail and we'll get your name on the door. I'm thinking maybe San Diego is sold out, but yeah, just let us know.
That's awesome, though.
And we'll catch up. Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, the crowds have been great on tour.
First time on the West Coast, or have you been to these cities before?
I've been to San Diego before. I've been to Mysterious Galaxy, the store that's hosting us. I think I've done a couple of shows there. But like I say, I haven't been anywhere in the States since 2019. I haven't been on the road since before Dark Dawn came out, which was the third Ammonite book. So yeah, it'll be cool to see you all again.
Well, I think you're gonna hit San Diego when the weather's good. We've had a lot of rain this year.
Oh, good.
So you'll get some good weather, hopefully.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. And we'll add all this to our show notes for those listening and following. And we'll hope to have you back on book 3.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your time. It was awesome to talk to you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much.